Welcome to the Effortless Swimming podcast. My guest today is a returning guest who's been a number of times. Carl Reader, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan, for having me back. It's always good to chat with you.
We chat here and there because you work with a lot of the swimmers that I coach through the online membership, and you work with them on not only getting better connected, which we're going to talk about, but helping them work through niggles or issues that they might have, particularly triathletes that come from often the bike and the run. And so I'd like to get your feedback on some of those things that you're seeing with the work that you do, and then how that actually relates to not only getting rid of some of those injuries and niggles, but also how that helps people swim better. So I want to get into that with some case studies of people that you've worked with. And just to sort of step it off, talked about connection before we jump on the call here, and how having things work together is really important in swimming. And it's something that I see when I'm coaching people at clinics, because often with the swimmers who aren't as fast, it's their top half doing one thing, the back half doing another, and there's not great connection there. So when you make make some simple changes or teach people how to move better, then they can swim a lot faster for often a lot less effort. So what are some of those things that you're seeing when you work with people who maybe aren't very well connected through their movements, and then that transition that you help them go through to get connected?
Yeah, it's a good question. The thing with this connection is very interesting, the top path and the bottom path of the body working together. And one of the things I noticed was in my own body as well was if I hold a very heavy kettlebell and I stand still, after a couple of seconds, it feels really heavy. But if I start walking, it becomes light or lighter. And so I could pick up that the lower body was actually like generating like power or like flow or energy, electrical like power to the muscles. And it's the same when you're running, for example. If you just run and keep your arms still, then there's no sort of contribution from the upper body helping the legs run. So when you start to get a little bit of movement of the arms, it generates power to the lower body. And so that connection going from upper to lower is, especially for swimming, I mean, the swimming is arms and legs, that connection is essential, and often missing or not as effective in swimmers, especially with poor posture. So the work that I do is try to, like I say, to tell all my guys online or in swimmers, is you need to get connected. And what that means is like through the middle part of the body. And that's often where the disconnect comes. You'll notice and poor posture is a big part of that. But we think of it as like core strength and the core, but it's actually like this, the body's like, there's like when you contract muscles, it generates electricity. So the actual contraction of muscles generates electrons, and that then flows through the fascia, which listeners are familiar with. And so that's a big part of that, getting that connection, is loosening up the fascia through getting the core stronger, but it just getting the spine to move more efficiently as well. So a lot of restrictions in the back causes a sort of like disconnect. And you'll notice the swimmers as well, like I think you shared in some of your videos as well, just how they struggle with the breathing. They have to lift their head up the water, or they're dropping their arm, or they haven't got a proper reach, or their arms aren't connecting with the legs. Often that's posture as well. So that's been a big thing, is getting connected. So I know it's a word that's thrown around a lot, but it really is super important.
Yeah, we were doing a little bit of work together when you were helping me with my squat movement, and like it took probably 20 minutes, I'd say, 15 minutes maybe, of some sort of dedicated time with you just over Zoom, working on getting me to move properly through my squat. And then the difference I noticed was it was much more through the core, through the glutes, rather than just that lower back movement. And now I'm much more aware of when I am moving correctly, even walking up the stairs, because I sort of spoke to you about a knee issue that I had a couple of, probably 2 months ago now. And he was just really having trouble with it. And some of that was sort of stemming just from how I was even just walking upstairs and then moving through the hips, which was kind of like a similar movement to the squat. So I'm much more aware of when I am doing it correctly and when I'm not. And I see what you do is very similar to what I do when I'm analyzing people on video with their swimming. There's a lot of nuance to these, what seem like simple and basic movements, but there's a lot to it.
Absolutely. And, and back on the connection side, I mean, you've heard this and listeners have heard me say this over and over, but the squat done correctly is one of the best ways to get connected, because of the effect it has on the spine and the effect that it has on your posture. So getting that technique right is so important. And as we just talk about the case studies just now, we'll see that's pretty much, people often, what exercise did you really do? And I said, well, most of it's just starting with the squat. And it has such a profound effect on the wiring of the fascia and unlocks the middle back, as we talked about. That's part of where the rotational centers are in the spine. It gets the glutes. It changes the whole system. And so and also one of the things you'll notice with swimmers, and a lot of people struggling with issues, is tight hip flexors. And squats done correctly is a great way to release that. And the hip flexors are the deep muscles at the back of the back there. And they're often referred to as the battery packs of the body, the power generating power. So think about swimming, running, squatting. So when we can get to those muscles, we just get connection, and that kind of like has a ripple effect through the whole body. And the results some of the results are quite dramatic. Like, it can be one session, and very often it's 1 or 2 sessions that people are already experiencing quite dramatic improvements.
So for anyone who's listening, who's listened to all of these podcasts with you, I think you might need to change your middle name to Carl Squat Reader. I think it's the first time I had you on the podcast. It was like you mentioned that the best core exercise you can do is probably the squat. And that sort of flipped the switch in my mind about how important that movement is. And I didn't quite understand it initially and how important it is. But just the more I come to learn, I really start to understand why you said that. I want to move into some case studies, because I think the best way to sort of understand a lot of this stuff is with case studies and people that you've worked with, and they've probably come to you with a few niggles here and there, and then the work that you've done with them to help make some changes. So is there someone that you've worked with recently who's come to you with an issue that you've helped them with?
Yeah, so there's still ongoing members, of course, that I work with ongoing, but there's been 2 new members that have joined that have reached out to me as well, like recently. And they're both triathletes, but one of them is a lady, and she's struggled with chronic hamstring problems, with more medically ischial tuberosity, which is where the hamstrings attaches onto the pelvis. And if you ever struggle with that type of hamstring injury, it's really painful and often chronic. And so, cycling, running, and swimming was just causing her so much like drag and frustration. And she tried everything. She'd done the whole treatment thing and routes, and was in a process of really doing hardcore strengthening exercises when I met her. And I just said to her, can we just go back to the basics and just check with the squatting actions again? Because once you get that squatting, as we talked about, her posture, she had low back sort of alignments as well, and posture issues. And literally gave her the squat for the first exercise. And the second time we spoke, she said, I can't believe it's already 50% better already. Wow. And then now she said it's hardly any drag except when she runs sometime. And that's a running technique thing, which I think she needs to work on. But she said to me, I can't believe the results that it's from just squatting. And again, it really is that profound. So yeah, we did squats, we did step ups, did some rotational stuff with her. And once we got her glutes to fire and the hamstrings let go. And that's the key thing. The glutes, when they work and the core work together, which you get in the squat, then the hamstrings and all the muscles can function like they're supposed to function.
So the way that she was going through those movements, it was just all going through the hamstring, was it, or mostly through the hamstring, which was causing those issues?
Yeah, so the hamstring tendon, you need tension on hamstrings. And if you're on a bike, sometimes you'll find people's pelvises are not their posture's poor. They sort of sit on the hamstring insertion where it actually goes onto the pelvis, and it creates compression. It makes it weak in a sense. So you want to just get the pelvis in the right position, not only on a bike, but if you're running or swimming or doing any sort of movement, that you're shifting the load from the actual junction where the hamstring tendon inserts into the bone, more into the muscles and into the glutes. So it's all about a loading thing, how much load you put through the body.
And now by going through those, was she already doing squats and step ups in her gym routine?
Hectic squats and step ups. Yeah, quite intense exercises, heavy weights, because she'd heard about strengthening the glutes, and I think, most people who are in the sporting industry already know that you need to strengthen your core and glutes, but this is where the coaching comes in, just really modifying the techniques and find little tweaks that you can just make a quick change and then suddenly you're away.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's not surprising either when you see what some people are doing on a regular basis. If it's an incorrect movement, even slightly, it can have unintended consequences, and you might be doing the right thing in terms of strengthening the glutes, but if it's done the wrong way, it can lead to that. It's really interesting. And then have you got another person there that you've been working with?
Yeah, so this is also a gentleman who's a triathlete, also very disciplined, works hard on his exercises, heavy exercises, and has a muscle imbalance. and it was just affecting his swimming, like especially when he turned his head to the one side. So there was like a rotational asymmetry there. And wasn't really bugging him too much, but he was struggling on and just to get the kick and the feeling that sort of connected in the water, when you're swimming. And so we again went back to the squats. I just pulled back the weights a bit, the load, and then looked on using. So the squat's like a tool. It can be used to. We use it to like strengthen, release, depending on postural work. So for him, it was really just getting him to release his hip flexors. So we did squat. So we actually squatted down like 45 degrees, and then we made him hold those positions for a couple of seconds to let the deep hip flexors release. And so that also gave wonderful results, helped him with his running straight away. And then now we still like just trying to get more rotational balance, but he's already noticed in the water, like being more connected, like his hip pain's gone away. He's running faster. He's swimming much more effortlessly, which is, I haven't even improved the technique. It's just that your body's free, like.
What do you do for the rotation? You mentioned the rotational balance.
You struggle to turn to the one side. So often they'll want to turn their head to the right, and then they find turning left is hard, or vice versa. And we talk about rotational symmetry. So for me, I'm a golfer. So you're swinging one side all the time, and then you find those rotation. So it's just trying to balance those out and get to the causes of like what's causing those rotational symmetries. So I work a lot on like giving them some tests online, and then I see where they struggle, and then I do the opposite movements or try and get them connected through there. So that's a big part, especially for cycling and runners. It's sort of like up and down and back and forward, like, okay, you should have a little bit of rotation when you run. But swimming is a sport where you do have that nice rotation going through the body. And I think a lot of the guys, I know for myself, like the swimming's the hardest part, like the running and the cycling, it's easy, but swimming, I find, some people can relate that swimming's are not their strongest point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why I can do what I do, because swimming is such a technical sport that it requires quite a bit to sort of figure it out sometimes. And with the rotational side of things, are you asking like lifestyle questions or trying to get to the root of it, or it's just looking at, all right, how do we then correct this imbalance here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, flexors are tricky muscles. If you go Google like back pain or symmetry, the number one thing that pops out is hip flexor, or psoas as it's known in the medical side. And so, I mean, sitting is one of the biggest problems because it shortens and weakens hip flexors. So we know that most people are aware of, sitting for long periods of time. Just poor movement patterns is another cause of hip flexor tightness, which I address online, teaching people how to move functionally and properly. And the other side of it's emotional is a big part of it. So your hip flexors tend to store the emotions. So like negative emotions, strong emotions. So that's the mind-body connection. And that's the side that obviously I don't deal with, but I do bring to the table that people who are really struggling to like get a breakthrough, especially for triathletes who are trying to like optimize performance and get, it's one of those things that they struggle to break plateaus as you start to then have to like ask the deeper questions like where, is this, and it's, it plays such a big role because if that muscle shut down, it's like having a low battery pack, so it affects everything. But just getting back as well, like when you get the hip flexors released, the glutes start to fire, the legs get stronger. And if you have stronger legs in the water, I mean, it just helps that whole propulsion phase. You can then relax on the upper body because you've got that power coming. I mean, you'll know that from the technique side of things as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, even just holding a streamlined position, really, like we'll sometimes see swimmers who are really tight through the hip flexors and they struggle to stay horizontal with their legs. Correct. So you're looking at their torso, you've got the hips, and then the legs are always just sitting down because they lack that range through the hip flexor. And obviously it creates a lot of drag, but you also don't quite get that drive through the hips. Like I think of Correct. The hips as when you're swimming, it's almost like you want them to be, it's like they're on hydraulics where you got this like nice right rotation, left rotation, and it's like they're on hydraulics, like just mechanically turning left to right. And you can get a lot of power from that when you're holding them in the right way and holding the right body line and being straight through there. And we talk a little bit about bracing the core and engaging the glutes a little bit to straighten things out. And that's Correct. When you can have those hips on hydraulics. Whereas if you're kind of sticking your bum out and you're bent through the waist, you're never really going to get it. So it's very subtle and nuanced to try and get that position. But from my experience, when people do finally get that to happen, and it takes a little bit of thinking about it to start with and considering how they're engaging those things. But when they do get it to happen, they're like, okay, wow, all right, I really notice a difference here. And it's just so much less effort for them to swim at the same speed because They're generating a lot of power through the middle of their body.
Yeah. And another thing which you mentioned in some of it as well, which is great, is the breathing. Like your diaphragm attaches to the hip flexors. So we talk about it's a big tendon, the central tendon of the diaphragm. So any sort of like compromised breathing or like struggling to breathe will then put tension on the hip flexors, So
Hmm.
just like relaxing in the water or learning to breathe. There was a member the other day said just breathing to the one side helped a lot to help her with her breathing, and it just took a lot of strain out the body. So that's such a big thing as well. Like we often underestimate, especially in swimming. I know it's something you come across a lot, but just even breathing exercises just to let go of tension. Some people meditate, some people go for a walk, whatever it is, but just that letting go has a big effect on the hip flexors. And if your hip flexors are tight, it's the number one handbrake in the squat. So like when I find people that can't squat properly, I know straight away, like you've got tension in the hip flexors. So we have to go back. And that's a lot of the work I do online, is like trying to help people to release that tension. Because if it's like driving a car with a handbrake on it, I mean, you can do it, but it's just it's going to burn out the tire.
Yeah, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, similar thing with lack of shoulder mobility, trying to get a good catch. Like you're always going to be limited. I mean, when we do the very first drill that we do in clinics is front kick, both hands out in front here, and you do see some swimmers who can't like keep the hands here and keep it close to the head, so they're going to be limited with obviously the range of motion and the position they can get to. So we just work with whatever they've got at the moment. But if you can improve on that over the course of a couple of weeks and a couple of months, and just consistently do some maybe exercises or stretches or mobility work to improve it, you'll absolutely notice a difference. And I mean, for myself, I'm starting to swim more because I wasn't able to a few months ago, and already like I was pretty tight through my upper thoracics, and I'm starting to get better range there. But yeah, I mean, as I'm getting this better range through there, like I'm starting to swim a lot better and feel a lot better. But it happens pretty quickly. You do start to tighten up if you're not staying on top of these things. So each night before bed, I'll just be rolling around on the floor in front of the TV with my mobility ball and a few other things, and just stretching. And yeah, it's really starting to pay off. But you've got to be consistent with that and really stay on top of it, because if you are sitting a lot, if you are doing some strenuous workouts, like for me, I surfed twice today and I swum, and I'm starting to feel it. So I'm going to need to roll around for at least 45 minutes, I think, on the floor to kind of undo all those things that I've done. And yeah, you just got to keep on top of it.
Absolutely. And it's one of those things, like, for me, like my right side tends to get tighter than my left side. So I'm right-handed, but my left side is way stronger. And so so my right hip flexor, if it gets tight, then my right shoulder gets tight as well. I know there's a crossover with the slings, but it's also this up and down. So the significant loss of power in my right side. And the minute the right hip flexor releases, it's like, then I'm almost double the strength of my left. And that's not an exaggeration. It's just the power comes through. So for swimmers who're struggling with the shoulder issues, we go to hip flexors again, and yes, tight thoracic plays a big part of that as well. But it's interesting to see again, just bring it back to the squat again, got to keep it back to the squats. But it's just, it's such a simple movement that everybody, if they learn how to do it correctly, whether you're like an amateur swimmer, beginner swimmer, or even like a serious elite triathlete, you're probably doing squats with some sort of squat exercise in your regime exercise. And just to have it like tweaked, like just to improve different muscles that are firing, or even shifting the load can make a huge difference to the fascia and everything. Yeah.
And for those listening, if you're wondering how to squat, all these nuanced details that we're talking about, there's two ways you could go about it. We've got your functional movement course, which you go through the squat, which we'll put in the show notes here. So that's got a whole range of movements and detailed instructions on how to do them properly, including that's one of the modules. And then obviously you work with people as well, like we're talking about you work with a lot of our members at the moment. So what's the best way to get in contact with you? And if someone's got a niggle or that they need help with this stuff, how can they get in touch?
Yeah, they can just get hold of me on my email address, which is carlwellness@gmail.com. And that's Carl with a C, wellness@gmail.com, or carlreadercoaching.com, Carl again with a C, and then they can find the details there. But it works really well. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, and some people might be hesitant to work with someone online because, you're not there in person, but I mean, look, it's obviously so much easier because you can do it on your own time. You don't have to travel anywhere. But it's like when I started coaching people online, they'd send their videos and I'd give them feedback. With our stroke analysis coaching, I wasn't sure if it would actually work online. But after probably 7 years now, I think I've been doing it. It's like it absolutely does work. And sometimes it works even better because people have got the ability to have a session and then they have their own time to practice it. You can come back and catch up. And in many cases, it works a lot better. So
it can depend on, like, it can be personal, people, a lot of the guys, it varies, like it can be a once-off session. It can be like I do a lot of one-on-one personal training with, like, we just train. And then if it's injury related, it depends on what their needs. And often it's just a FaceTime as well. Like we literally put a phone up, FaceTime and go. And because I guess it's just that's my what I do is I watch people squat all day, literally. And so, like, you watch this, and I know what to look for. So it doesn't take me long before I can see like where they're going wrong, or like as I watch them move on the camera, I can straight away pick up and say, you've got this asymmetry, or you're struggling with that shoulder. So just to have someone watch them, I think, is a big thing. And there's different offers as well, so that they don't have to lock into long-term if they just want to check in for one session or whatever. Yeah, it's very useful because you don't know what you're doing wrong, or you don't know what you're doing wrong.
No, that's right. We got to get this middle name added, I think, next for the next podcast. I appreciate being on the podcast again. And any final words before we finish this one up?
No, I think that's good. I think just that whole idea of getting connected to your body, like, a really body awareness connection, and just how that translates into better swimming and good results.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate being on the podcast and for being there for the swimmers and the people that I work with. Yeah, because I can't help them with this stuff. And really appreciate it. So thanks again for being on the podcast.
You're welcome. Good chatting, Brendan. Keep well.